So that's just your notification of recording. So welcome to the May bi-monthly update webinar. I believe it will be fairly short since we've been having weekly phone calls regarding COVID-19. If you go to the next slide, and we will have, there are not many slides. I will make these available and they will be posted on the webpage. So first we're going to have an update about remote assessment, and Christine will handle that. And then I would like to give you a picture of where we were back at the beginning of March in moving towards reaching the outcomes that we have to reach to help you understand what we need to work towards in 2021. And then there are just a couple small, a couple items related to COVID-19 that we'll cover. So I'm going to mute myself and I will let Christine talk about remote assessment.
Good morning, everybody. Hope you had a good weekend. It was beautiful out. I just wanted to talk a little bit about, sort of give you an update where we are on a remote assessment. If you could please mute yourself as you join. Thanks. So right now, where we're at is we are in the process of verifying people for remote proctoring of assessments. You should have received an email with some links in it to sign your staff up. Right now, we're limiting to one per agency. A couple people have asked for additional people to be trained, and depending on the size of the agency, I've approved that right away, but I'm waitlisting the rest of the people. So if you have already signed up for one and you'd like another person trained, sign them up now, get them on the list, I'll waitlist them, and as soon as we have space, we'll get your second person in so that everybody can have at least 2 people trained. If you have lost the link or don't think you ever got the link, shoot me an email and I'll send those links out to you. CASAS is coming soon. So right now we're only doing verification for TABE and Best Plus, but we're working on a pilot with the CASAS, and that should, hopefully by the end of this week or early next week, we'll have something for you. I'll, keep you updated via email. And contrary to what I said originally, that it was just goals, it actually does include life and work. So that's good news in terms of ESL assessments. So what's next for us? The test administration team is looking at the possibility of allowing administration of assessments to more than one student at a time. TABE and CASAS both have guidance that allows for that. We just need to examine it. And again, what we're looking for, and I've said this a million times, is we're looking for standardized testing conditions. We need to make sure that the testing conditions are standardized so that the assessments are valid. As I mentioned earlier, we're looking at training additional program staff to give these remote assessments, and the training of partners. Some of you have asked about your career link partners wanting to get trained, and again, sign them up. I'm going to waitlist them, and then once we have all the programs up and running, we'll start training your partners as well, because we want to be good partners. If you have any questions about any of this, shoot me an email, chauk@pa.gov, and that's it. That's all I have. Thanks. Oh, I see I have a question. When was the link sent out for the remote proctoring? I don't remember receiving it. Larry, I'll send it out. I'll send it to you personally again, okay? All right, thanks. I'm going to hand it over to Amanda. You need to unmute, Amanda. Okay.
Sorry, I thought I had. Okay. So, so I would like to talk a little bit about where we were as a state kind of pre-COVID-19. We have a state level version of the Access template, and we took a full export of eData on March 6th. And we have kept that as a separate template so that we kind of have a state of the state before the statewide shutdown went into place. And so I thought, and I think that is, that's a good record of where we were before things went a little crazy. And so here are some data showing where you were at that point. So as of March 6, 2020, and that was data that were entered by March 6, 2020. So for some of you, that would have been data up until March 5th or 6th. For others of you, since we have the 14-day data entry period was in place, through the third week in February, so somewhere around February 21st, which is 2/3 of the way through the program year. So programs should have been somewhere around 65 to 70% of their contracted enrollment at least. And the good news is that as a state, combining all of the agencies, we were at about 75%, 74.4%. Of contracted enrollment. There were 7 family literacy and 22 adult education programs that were at or above the target, so they were at 65% or above of contracted enrollment. There were another 4 family literacy and 7 adult education programs that were 50 to 65%. That could have either been some data entry issues, or it could have been that you were a little bit below. And then we had 4 family literacy programs and 2 adult education programs that were below 50%. So while we are not going to be imposing any conditions on your 2020-21 grants based on progress towards meeting contracted enrollment in 1920, I would strongly recommend that you look at your own data with your staff and think about where you were prior to COVID-19. The majority of you had kind of corrective action plans to address meeting contracted enrollment and really sit down and think about what was working and what wasn't working. And if there are things that are not working, how do you fix them? How can some new skills and instructional methodologies that you have adopted over the last couple of months, how could those potentially help you meet contracted enrollment and address any issues better? So, just because COVID has hit doesn't mean that the data prior to COVID isn't valid. It is something you should be looking at. And if you're one of those programs that was significantly below where you should have been, figuring it out. Why are you there? What can you be doing to improve those numbers? Okay. But in general, you were enrolling people as you should have been. Kind of the bad news related to that is enrollment numbers for federal performance really aren't all that important. As a state, we do not have a contracted enrollment that the OCTAE expects us to meet. Our funding is not tied to our enrollment. So those are just the numbers that you tell us you are going to propose to serve when you apply for the funds, and those are therefore the numbers you're expected to meet as part of the contract that you hold with us. So that's a compliance issue with the division, but it really doesn't impact performance at the national level. What impacts performance at the national level are the 6 outcome measures. And the one that you have the most control over is measurable skill gain, and especially the educational functioning level gain. Now, last year, around this time, we were looking at what we call the Table 4B numbers. Table 4B is showing the number of people who were pre- and post-tested who showed educational functioning level gains. So what that means is we're not looking at enrolled adults, because we recognize that as of March 6th, there would have been adults who were in your program who were still actively participating, who had not yet reached a point at which you should post-test them. So we would not have expected you to post-test them, and so they would not have shown an educational functioning level gain. What we looked at was Table 4B. Table 4B are the people that you have pre- and post-tests for the program year. If they have a pre- and a post-test, we have to assume that you are assessing them according to policy, and therefore those individuals have attended at least the minimum number of hours that the publishers indicate are appropriate for post-testing, and that they therefore have a very good likelihood of showing educational gain, which for the majority of them should also be an educational functioning level gain. We understand that not everyone who shows an educational gain point-wise is necessarily going to show an educational functioning level gain. However, a large number of them need to in order for us to meet our targets that are established for the federal level. So, as of March 6, 2020, as a state, 52.64% of the adults who had been pre- and post-tested showed an EFL gain. Okay, 52.64%. Last year, 2018-19, when our overall measurable skill gain performance was 43.85%, which was below our target, the percentage of individuals who were pre- and post-tested who showed an educational functioning level gain was 66%. So we are way below where we need to be in order to have a chance at meeting our 1920 targets. Now, something to keep in mind is that OCTAE is very aware of what has happened with COVID-19, and so some of that will be taken into consideration. The statistical model that the federal office uses will probably help address some of those issues. But nonetheless, as of March 2nd, or I'm sorry, March 6th, the people that you chose to post-test were not even remotely close to meeting the EFL gain targets that we need to meet as a state. So again, really sitting down and having conversations with your staff and looking at your data is really, really important. So as of March 6th, we had 2 agencies. Now these are adult ed agencies. These don't include family literacy because the N's in family literacy are pretty small. But we had 2 agencies that had EFL gains above 70% for people who had a pre- and post-test. So their Table 4B was 70% or above. We had 24 agencies whose EFL gains for adults with pre- and post-testing was below 50%. So, as you're looking at program improvement and having conversations, that Table 4B in combination with Table 4 is important, because the thing to consider is, say you have 100 students Well, if you only post-test 10 of them, even if you have 100% on your table 4B, as a state, our measurable skill gain isn't going to be good enough because you have 90% of your students who haven't even been given a chance to demonstrate educational functioning level gain. So it is a combination of things. You can't look at table 4 and table 4B separately, siloed, and think, oh, okay, well, you know, my table 4B is at 70%, so I'm okay, or my table 4B is at 100%, so I'm okay, because 100% of the people I've post-tested showed an EFL gain if very few of the people stayed long enough to post-test. So, you know, I think I said at the beginning of the year, you know, you contract with us to serve a number of individuals, and the expectation is you will serve at least 100% of your contracted enrollment, and 100% of those individuals, you know, so what is the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is 100% of contracted enrollment. All of those individuals remain in your program long enough to be able to show measurable skill gains. We recognize that that is not what happens, but that's what your target needs to be, and that's what you need to be working towards, with the recognition that reality does come into place, and not everybody who shows point gains on a test will necessarily show educational functioning level gain within the program year. But really, ultimately, that is your goal for these individuals, is to get them into the program, keep them for as long as necessary for them to achieve their outcomes, which for the majority of them would include an educational functioning level gain. The reality is that the people who give us money, so at the federal and the state level, and right now state level is really, really important. They look at enrollment numbers, but what they're really looking at is outcomes. And we know that the work that you do is important. And I talk about the importance and the value of the work that you do to my leadership. But it is important that we have numbers that can back that up. And we need to work on improving our numbers. It is also important for you at the local level to share successful numbers with your local elected officials, but also share the stories of what you are doing with your local elected officials, as well as those individuals who represent you in Harrisburg. This is, it's going to be a tight budget season, and we know that the work that you do is very important, and I can tell the administration how important the work is that you do and the impact that you have. You need to get that message to your local and state representatives so that when they look at these numbers and they don't match what they think they should match, because of course they don't have the context you have, that they have another side of the story, which is the real people that you're serving and the work that you're doing and the progress that people are seeing that may not show up in the numbers. But at the same time, we need to be working on improving these numbers. Just as for a little bit of context for you, for 2021, our measurable skill gain target is 44.8%. And for 2021-22, our measurable skill gain target will be 45.4%. So we still are, you know, we're still 1 to 1.5 percentage points below what the feds are expecting us to hit. So that's something that I'm asking you to really sit down with your staff and look at as we move forward. Okay, Christine, could you move on to the next slide?
Did you want to take a question about what you just talked about? There is a question in the chat.
Sure.
Okay, the question is, when Amanda says there will be no conditions on agencies that were under-enrolled, does that mean that no agencies will receive a funding reduction due to performance in 2021?
There are a few programs in that under 50% contracted enrollment who we may have individual discussions with about how things are going and what they're doing to meet the numbers, and if they have a plan in place to significantly improve those. In general, yes, that's what it means. But if you're one of those programs that's that's below 50%, there may be some conversations to be had. Were there any other questions?
Not at this time.
Okay. So I'm sure everyone's kind of sick of this phrase, the new normal, but that is kind of where we are now. I recently saw something that said as we move into the third month of the COVID-19 stay at home, I was like, wow, 3 months. But yes, as we move into this third month, I think it's pretty clear from what we're seeing in the news and what scientists are saying is we can expect this particular virus to be around, and at least for a couple of years can expect waves of these things. And so depending on how the administration chooses to address those, we may see kind of waves of tighter shutdowns versus loosening and so on. And what that means is we need to prepare for it. And we need to figure out a way to do what it is that we are expected to do within this new normal. So, COVID-19 will be taken into consideration when we're looking at 2019-20 because it was a surprise. No one was planning for it. We didn't have systems in place to address it. But moving forward, we need to take the lessons that we have learned and figure out how we are going to do what we need to be doing within this new normal. So we at the division have been having conversations around, how are we going to do this moving forward? And I think I've said before, and it bears repeating, we have been very impressed with what our local programs have done to pivot from our routine in-person instruction, classes 5 hours a week, etc., to providing services at a distance. And we have had many programs saying to us, hey, some of this stuff is working really well, and is it going to be possible for us to continue doing this? And the answer is yes. So as we prepare, or as you prepare for 2020, 21 to write your grants, etc., we at the division will be providing greater flexibility in the use of the distance learning options. So the ones that we introduced during this COVID-19 period will be incorporated into the existing distance learning policy and will continue to be allowable. Once conditions have reached the point where in-person services are allowed, you will have the flexibility to combine in-person and distance learning options in the best ways that will serve your students. There'll be flexibility in the number of hours of scheduled classes. It really is going to be up to you to provide services to students that allow them to have access to instruction of sufficient intensity and quality to achieve their educational goals and demonstrate educational gain in a time frame that meets their needs. Okay. So the purpose is to get outcomes. And what we are going to find is we anticipate that there's going to be an influx of individuals interested in services, as a lot of individuals who lost jobs, and many of the people who have lost jobs are individuals who benefit from our services. On the other hand, a lot of the services that are considered essential services, the people who are the essential workers, are also positions that individuals in our programs are appropriate for and would like to start their careers in. So we need to make sure that as we provide the services to them, that they can get what they need quickly. So we are giving you the flexibility to figure out how to make that happen, but that also puts the responsibility on you to make sure that it does happen. The next slide. Okay. So to that end, as you're planning and as we're preparing for next year, we at the division will be making some revisions to the policies and the guidelines to reflect the greater flexibility that we're giving you. So, we generally say a minimum of 5 hours per week of instruction in classes and 3 hours per week of tutoring. We will be more flexible with that. Keep in mind, however, that we're telling you you need to provide instruction of sufficient intensity and quality to help students meet their educational goals. We are in the grant, in the class section of the grant application under agency information. We have made some revisions to that section that will excuse me, that will hopefully allow you to show some of the more unique, innovative ways of providing classes and providing instruction as we're doing it. If you have ideas about class models that are hybrid models that incorporate both in-person and distance education, or if you have some distance learning opportunities that you don't feel are reflected in the policy, please talk to your advisor about that. We're going to be discussing things that you come to with us. Please don't ask it right now in the webinar because I won't be able to give you an answer. We do have to kind of think about proposals and all the conditions and requirements, etc. But if you do have some ideas about models that you would like to try or ways of providing services that are different from what have been allowable up to now, please share those with your advisors with as much detail as possible so that we can discuss it and then get back to you. Another thing that I would like you to consider is what kind of additional services, instructional models, innovative activities would you like to provide to your students if there was an option of one-time funds to get the resources needed to provide those additional services. So we are not doing an across-the-board increase in grant amounts for next year. However, it is possible, looking at some funding that we have, that we might be able to provide additional one-time funds to make some purchases to get the resources that you need. So as you are doing your grant, if you're going to function within the budget that is level funding, but then as you're talking to your staff, are there things that you're like, if we just had blah, 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 we might be able to do X, Y, Z. And think about it. And we will probably be asking for ideas later on. I can't promise anything, but that is an option. Another important thing moving forward. Many of you are purchasing technology right now as we are implementing a lot of distance education. I think there are a lot of entities providing purchasing Chromebooks or other types of tablets for students to use, laptops or other kind of technology to allow teachers to work from home, hotspots, etc. And we are allowing you to continue using those. And what we have seen in the past is that the purchase of technology tends to be an afterthought in your grants. And many times what happens is people come to us kind of in the second half of the year and say, hey, we had to cancel some classes, or our benefits were less expensive than we thought, or I had a teacher leave, and so we have this extra money, so we would like to buy technology. Really, if we're looking at the use of technology for instructional purposes as being central to what you do. And what that means is you need to have technology plans in place. And a technology plan is sitting down and thinking now and into the future, to the extent that you know, what technology do you need and will you need, and what is your plan to maintain the technology capacity. You don't want to buy a bunch of technology now and in 3 years it is not up to date anymore, and then you kind of have to keep your fingers crossed that something happens and you can free up money in your budget. So sitting down and thinking about how are we going to plan for the replacement of technology over the next couple of years in order to maintain and build the capacity. Some of you are part of entities that may have larger technology plans. You may have the capacity within your organization for them to support technology plans that are specific to your program. For others of you, this may be a new idea, and I think we're looking at being able to provide some technical assistance. This is not something that you're going to have to do as part of your grant application for 2021. So don't panic like that your grants are going to be held up by this, but it is something that you need to be thinking about. So if you're beginning to budget for new technology, you're going to need to budget on a regular basis for the online or the computer-based administrations of assessments. Whereas in the past you might have just purchased paper versions of assessments. Now, really everybody should be moving towards the computer-based versions or the online versions of assessments because it really is a better way to administer tests, both especially for students for whom technology is comfortable, but also, that's going to be an ongoing expense, but you also need to plan for the ongoing expense of hardware and related software. Next slide, please. Okay, so that is the information kind of for moving forward program year-wise 2021. Regarding reopening, there are more and more counties that are moving into yellow. If your larger organization or you have partners that are coming to you about doing in-person services, and what I would say is this includes doing any type of in-person assessment, in-person intake and orientation, please contact your advisor with the details of that request. Your advisor will not be able to answer the question. They will pass that on to me, and I will need to pass that on to my boss and the leadership in Pennsylvania. Right now, educational services remain closed until counties are in green. And from the conversations that I have had with leadership, our services are considered educational services and therefore should remain closed. In-person provision of services needs to remain closed until the counties are green. But if there are requests being made of you, they can be considered for an exception on a case-by-case basis, but that will not even be at my level. It will need to go above me. I had hoped to be able to kind of give you some kind of blanket leeway, but I am not able to do that at this point. So please, if you are being approached by someone about in-person services before your county goes green, please share that with your advisor, provide as much detail as possible, and then expect to have to wait a little while before you get an answer from us. And then, it's going to be as part of the workforce development system, adult ed programs, and family literacy, where you work with your partners. You're going to want to remain in communication with the local workforce boards and your PA CareerLink partners. I am on weekly calls that LNI has with the local boards, and there is a call scheduled tomorrow specifically to talk about kind of the quote-unquote reopening of the PA CareerLink sites. Again, I suspect that you're going to have different requests depending on the counties that you are in. Again, you'll need to contact your advisor to share that. As we get information that I'm able to share with you, I will share that, but please do reach out if you are not already in communication, because I know many of you are already working with your local boards. But please reach out and kind of ask to be included in the information so that you know what's happening locally. Okay, and that's all I have.
So we have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Given social distancing and limited number of people we can fit on a screen, will we have to have smaller we will have to have smaller classes. Does the division expect the same enrollment numbers? Will we be expected to run more small classes to meet enrollment?
So you are expected to serve the same number of individuals you're contracted to serve, yes. How you serve them, you need to figure that out. That is why we are offering you greater flexibility. It may mean that your teachers are going to need to be available at different and more unusual hours than has traditionally been the case. It may mean that you're doing, more small group instruction with fewer people. That's why we're saying you need to kind of figure out how you're going to make this happen. We're attempting to give you considerable flexibility in how that happens. And if you have ideas around ways to make that happen that you feel are not currently reflected in our policies and guidelines, including the addendum to the distance learning policy, please reach out to your advisor. But the reaching out to your advisor is not, how should I do this? Okay? It is, this is what we would like to try, and this is how we would like to do it. Will that be acceptable? Okay. Any other questions?
I had a question earlier on about remote assessment proctoring. Someone asked if they should send me the names for the CASAS trainings at this time, and my answer was no. Wait till you get the link for the signups. Sending me individual emails about that, invariably things will go awry. So as soon as we're ready to do signups for that, you'll get an email with the links. And those are the only questions that we have.
Okay.
Okay. New question. Zoom has a way to see who has viewed a recording. Will those hours for a class be acceptable?
Okay. As I indicated, please don't ask questions like this on the webinar because we're going to have to consider things. So what I would need is, if that's something you want to do, how do you plan to use that? Because if you're just going to have somebody watch a recording and there's no follow-up, no nothing, is that truly instruction? Why are they even coming to an adult ed program? They could just get on, they could just watch any old video. And so, again, if you have ideas about how you want to do something and how you want to use tools, it needs to be within a plan and shared with your advisor. And then we can come back and say, yes, we could see how we could make that work. And this is how you can report it. Again, the other thing to keep in mind is that just like with homework or any kind of supplemental activities that you gave to individuals that did not fall under the supplemental distance education, just because you cannot report the hours as instructional hours does not mean it is not a valuable resource for your student and not a valuable educational service. And then you would track that kind of locally. And if a student has participated in a significant amount of that, that could be used to inform when you post-test them, and you would make a note in the student file.
Okay, we have another question. Per Amanda, the Department of Education will open up when the county gets to green. Is the same true for L&I? In other words, will CareerLink be in a position to open up prior to adult education being able to provide services?
That is part, I think that is a big part of what is going to be discussed in a phone call that I'm going to be on tomorrow. It is my understanding that both the local board directors and L&I are hoping to proceed with caution. So I don't think that the intent is for CareerLinks to open their doors and allow people to come flooding in on the day a county turns green. They are working on kind of a common communication strategy. And then when I have that, I will share that with you. So that's the best I can do with that answer. I suppose it's possible, but my feeling is that it is not going to be a situation where the doors are wide open and people will be able to come in for all kind of services, and then all of a sudden they're going to be saying, why aren't adult ed classes open?
Okay, we've got thank yous for your answers. We don't have any other questions that I see.
Okay, and then I guess one last thing, because I know that this had come up several weeks ago in one of our calls. For family literacy programs, we are still requiring you to get the end of school year reports from your in-school, I was going to say in-school youth, that's not correct, for your children who are attending school, for your school-aged children, there we go. I've talked to a couple of family literacy programs who have successfully gotten some end of school year reports. They are available in an electronic version that can be emailed. And I think that if you have established relationships with the teachers in the schools, that many of them will be able to provide that information to you. So there still is that expectation. And for those of you, data entry, you need to plan to be entering data and have data entered for the program year by the middle of July. That just the way the eData system works and the information, the data that we need for our reporting purposes, we do need to follow the plan timeline.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. One of the advisors received a question to her directly via email, just to make sure there will be no formal caps at all for next year. Question mark.
There will not be any formal caps required as part of the grant approval process. So last year what happened was you had to submit a corrective action plan and have it approved before we would process your grant application. We will not be doing that this year. That does not mean that you do not need to have your own internal corrective action plan, also called the program improvement plan, if you are not where you should be.
And to clarify, if I can add, if and when we go back to doing formal monitoring, if you have findings, you will have a corrective action plan for that.
Oh, yes, yes.
We have another question. Can we continue to administer informal assessments to those students who don't have appropriate technology?
Yes. I mean, so here's the thing. You should, if you mean in order to bring in new students, yes, that is allowable. It is always allowable to do informal assessments with your students. You should always be doing informal assessments with your students. However, if you're saying in lieu of the standardized assessments so that you can determine eligibility in order to bring on a new student, yes, that is still allowable.
There's nothing else in the chat.
Okay, then. Well, thank you all very much. Again, as always, if you have any questions, please send them to your advisors. We are still having our weekly meetings, and they've been very productive. Things we've been able to make decisions based on questions that programs have submitted. So keep them coming, but remember, it's up to you to figure out how you're going to do it and then proposing it to your advisor. So thank you, and have a good week. Have a good Memorial Day, however you choose to celebrate it. Sorry, one last thing. I will be sending out additional times for the weekly phone calls. We will not have one this coming week because this webinar is replacing the one from last Friday and this coming Friday, since this is the Friday before a long weekend. But I will send out ones beginning a week from this Friday. Thank you. Bye.